Yeah. Yeah, it is an amazing instrument because the radio has so many different sounds, especially signals that are not supposed to be heard, which has been through history, been constantly trying to improve the signals so the distortion and the noise disappear. But I think it's beautiful to use it as an instrument or as a sound source, and also as a source for playing back, like using, for instance, FM, local FM, and transmitting back to the radios again. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, radio is also a very interesting kind of intersection that goes far beyond the technological. So it's also kind of has a social sound to it, because the transmission that happens is not only technological transmission, but also a social transmission between people. So radio, especially if one organizes it from the bottom up, kind of tends to gather people and create new networks. So for me, sound of radio is also sound of a kind of, very ambiguous human network that is surrounded that is composed around it. Exactly. So it has also this sound, which is very interesting for me. Well, for me, radio, like in the West, we're often considered being kind of an obsolete medium, like something we don't really listen to, and is dedicated to kind of a very radio-specific content. But I think what we often forget is that radio is also a medium of emergency. So, for instance, when there is a coup d'etat, first things that are being occupied is a TV and a radio station, and usually internet is not working. If there is a really bad weather, so there is no electricity, radio is actually something that can operate like on a very, under pretty much any conditions. So, again, kind of in the West where everything is considerably, in a good state and within of a kind of very privileged environment, we tend to think of radio as something obsolete. But as soon as, as one says, shit hits the fan, then radio systems become very central for, not just for communication, but for different forms of organizing and action, So in that sense, it's actually very, very dominant still. And it still is the most widespread medium in the world, which we kind of forget. Not everyone has internet.
Public use of radio in the coming decade, yeah. I think one of the things that we're finding through talking to people who, especially younger generations, who are finding that actually radio is a medium that they can express themselves, they can organise themselves, they can organise together, they can broadcast something which otherwise they might not have a platform to do so. And then through that also find ways of learning how to work together, how to be together, how to take responsibility for this public space that they're entering into. And then there's some quite sort of interesting things that come up once you are still broadcasting on FM. In the UK, for example, then you're regulated by Ofcom. So you have to kind of also consider what you're saying and how you're saying it. And especially one youth-led radio station in Brighton called Platform B that we were speaking to spoke a lot about what it means for them to broadcast on FM and be much more in a public domain. But how they're also having to kind of rethink or think about how they talk about their politics, talk about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and sort of having to mediate and negotiate those regulations in that public space. Whereas online for them is a sort of space where they can really make the rules themselves, and through that then learn how to make that their own medium.
This is also something we've been looking into. That we've been meeting people of all kind of interests towards radio because it's so diverse. So we've been also gathering these recordings of people who has a relation to radio and collecting this in an archive that we learn from. And there is this really a wide diversity of use and practice of radio, which is quite exciting. I think it's not that specific because it is a memory. It's a little bit like if you've been somewhere and you tasted a really good orange and you come somewhere completely else, and then you're leading straight back to a situation where that orange was eaten. It's a little bit like that. It's these memory triggers that it may be one specific memory, but it also might be a memory of a soundscape that you don't remember where it came from. So, yeah.
And I think that those, like memories, those sounds are quite hard to articulate what's lost until something kind of makes you realise that they've gone. And I guess one of the things that we're interested in is what that sort of silencing of those errors and sounds and signals and those things that disappear from the kind of sonic landscape or audio surroundings, what kind of consequences that has more widely, and what that relates to a kind of more general silencing of difference, of voices, of particularities, of errors. And that goes into lots of different realms of different ways of living, of administrating, of organising. So there's something kind of in those sounds which are lost before you've even realised that they've lost, and what implications that has more widely for what's being silenced in in looking towards or something which is more standardised, neutral, better for us, in fashion. And that's quite scary how much disappears without really realising it.
I kind of also like that radio is a being on its own right. It's kind of radio waves is an entity that also exists independently from humans, and in that sense I also consider memory is not really cannot be dedicated, we don't really own it. And in that sense it kind of exists also even if you don't have access to it. So there's this whole kind of dimension where radio trespasses this idea of just being like a human tool or an app, we are using for something like a gadget. So in this sense, even the smallest transistor, which is a quartz crystal, can be activated by the radio waves alone. So radio waves also transmit into nature on its own right, completely human independent, and that for me kind of also gives partially, as much as there's a lot of political disbalance being perceptible through the disappearance of these waves. At the same time, I'm thinking that there's also enough power in the waves themselves, and they will exist and keep the memory also when all the humans are gone at some point, one way or another. So.
We can also imagine, because all the analog radio signals go up to the sphere, bounce back from the ionosphere and stay there maybe. And they never disappear completely. So I think there's quite a lively space up there as well.